Earlier this week, the Treasury Department refused a request from House Democrats to see President Trump's tax returns. And acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney is doubling down on the administration's refusal. In an interview for this week's episode of The Takeout, he told CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett that Congress is never going to get them.
The Treasury Secretary this week informed Richard Neal, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, that the Treasury Department, after consulting the Justice Department, will not provide the president's taxes. You've gone on the record saying Congress will never see them.
That's absolutely right.
Why?
Because they're not entitled to see them by law. By the way, they know, especially on this one, they know they're never going to get these documents. This is a pure show pony type of situation. They know the legal reasons they can get those documents. And
legitimate legislative function.
Right, and they're not even close to that.
However, lawmakers may be able to see the president's state tax returns if a bill recently passed by the New York State Senate is approved by the state assembly and signed into law. The legislation would allow the state's Department of Taxation and Finance to share returns with certain congressional committees. New York State Senator Brad Hoylman introduced this legislation. He's a Democrat who represents New York's 27th Senate District. Senator, thanks so much for being with us
Thanks
again.
for having me, Ray.
So before the bill passed, State Senate Minority Leader John Flanagan, a Republican, told New York One, quote, "The issues that are taking place at the federal government level should be within the purview and authority of the federal government. This is a blatantly political act." What's your response to that?
My response is we as New Yorkers shouldn't be bystanders to the preservation of our democracy and the preservation of the rule of law. You know, Elaine, no one is above the law, even the President of the United States. Congress has the right to federal returns, including the president's, and they often ask for them. This goes back to 1924. Well, we in New York State can do something to assist Congress in its oversight responsibility by providing the state returns to one of the three congressional committees that has the federal right to do the same thing in Washington.
So you just reject out of hand the notion that the state level really has no jurisdiction in this matter?
Well, I believe, in fact, that we have a responsibility to stand up for other legislators who have that important oversight responsibility. Look, the state of New York routinely shares tax returns of New Yorkers with other states and the federal government. Through this legislation, we're just creating a third avenue with which New York State can share tax returns. One of the three tax committees, whether it be House Ways and Means, Senate Finance, or the Joint Committee on Taxation.
Well, there was an alternative proposal which would have limited the returns available for release to certain elected officials. Why not bring that bill forward?
Well, this is the bill that we've settled on because this is the bill that currently Congress needs to do its job. Donald Trump has broken over 40 years of political tradition by not releasing his tax returns, by stonewalling the American people, saying he was under audit, at one time promising he would release them, and now his administration saying under no circumstances will Congress receive those returns. New York can step into that void and help, I believe, avoid this constitutional showdown by passing this legislation.
So we mentioned that Treasury Secretary Mnuchin denying a House request for the president's taxes, which could lead to legal challenges. How concerned are you about that? What are you doing to prepare for that potential of a legal challenge happening?
Well, I think our bill is narrowly tailored, and at the same time, it applies to everyone. So you can't argue that this is a so-called bill of attainder that's directed at one person. This would apply to all New Yorkers. As a matter of fact, the federal government right now, those congressional committees have the right to get anyone's tax returns at the federal level. We're just providing a new avenue for them to obtain those taxes at the state level.
So your bill still needs to pass the state assembly and be signed into law by Governor Cuomo. The governor is often critical of the president, and Mr. Trump has called Cuomo and other state lawmakers, quote, presidential harassers. I mean, are you concerned at all that perhaps this legislation could end up benefiting the president, politically speaking?
I think that we as legislators, as public servants, as officials of the state of New York have to stand up for the rule of law. Our democracy is being undermined by a president that is flouting the will of Congress. We can do something about it here in the state of New York, Donald Trump's home and the home to many of his companies, by passing this legislation.
So for people who say, look, the more that Democrats, whether it be New York State Democrats, whether it be Democrats in Washington, continue to pursue this issue, the more that the president's base will be energized by this, you say?
I say it's time to stand up to for the rule of law, and to understand that no one's above it, not even the highest holder of the White House.
All right, before we let you go, I want to ask you about the 2020 campaign. A quick question. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is reportedly weighing a run. How do you feel about him potentially entering the race?
Well, I think, like others have said, he needs to enter it to actually, for any of us to have an opinion. But I think he's got a lot of work on his table here in the city of New York, and I think New Yorkers really want him to do his job here in the city. And
it doesn't sound like you think that's a good idea for him to enter.
I think it's very hard when you have, the second toughest job in the country to go off and try to run for the first one simultaneously. I think it's a real challenge for him in order to do both of those jobs at the same time.
All right, State Senator Brad Hoylman. Senator, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.